Support for Mid-Century Modern in St. Louis was provided by Mackey Mitchell Architects.
Crisp winter evenings at Steinberg Rink. Hot summer days at the Old Bush Stadium. Exploring the stars at the planetarium. Weekends browsing Northland Shopping Center. Suburban neighborhoods of modular homes. And the loved ones who once lived there. Now we refer to the design style of these places as mid-century modern. But for those who watched them being built in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, they were simply, thrillingly modern. The St. Louis landscape is filled with buildings that dared to break the classical mold at a time when the whole world was looking for new answers to old questions. For 3 generations, they have sheltered some of our fondest memories and appeared in cameo on countless family photos. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, but it doesn't always translate into preservation, which is exactly the challenge that many mid-century buildings have been facing since the late 1970s.
Come on, it's the saucer. This is a cool building. You don't want to tear this down?
Too new to seem historic, they were often viewed disposable at best, and at worst, to blame for the city's failed attempts at urban planning. But lately, thanks to the efforts of preservationists and a renewed appreciation in both the public and the architectural community for the style, these buildings are being reconsidered and restored. But what exactly defines mid-century modern architecture? Its form or its function, or both? How do 3-bed, 1-bath modular homes come from the same origins as the Gateway Arch or the Climatron? Why was the nation and St. Louis so ready to embrace this radical new style of design? The story of mid-century modern architecture isn't just about buildings and artistic vision. It's about the belief that the way life is lived can change, and change for the better.
When we first moved in, there were curtains, and I took them down immediately.
The main thing that I love about these houses is the way they relate to where they are. In other words, they distill the place they're in.
It really is an enchanting setting, how the house integrates with the yard and the landscaping.
An almost invisible threshold from the interior to the exterior.
There's some brickwork on the inside of the house that melds right into the brick patios.
It definitely feels like our backyard is an extension of our living room.
We feel like we're on vacation in our own house, and I think that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
It's the closest thing to living out of doors, yet undercover.
Having like a sense of like peace and stillness at home.
This house is still very current and contemporary feeling. Built in 1950. It's not a spring chicken. It really is ageless.
Built into the existing landscape with simple lines, an open floor plan, and lots of natural light, mid-century modern homes were originally designed with lifestyle, not status, in mind. Considering how radical the form was, their widespread popularity was an indication that people were ready for a change.
In the early 20th century, the fragility of classical power, government, banking industry was sort of laid bare by World War I, the Depression. There's a lot of sort of search for a new progressive vision for America.
Architecture was one of the most important ways in which America endeavored to redefine itself as it survived the Great Depression and watched the destruction of European cities and their classical buildings during the World Wars. One of the earliest and most well-known pioneers of this new vision was Frank Lloyd Wright, who looked past the traditional uses and forms of architecture and towards a future where built environments were sensitive to the natural world and enhanced the lives of those living or working in them. Using clever strategies like built-in furniture to maximize space and clear-story windows to harness natural energy and light, Wright's Usonian houses also showed that this new way of building and living could be affordable.
He was just one of a number of architects who were searching for ways to create particularly houses that met the needs of modern living, but didn't necessarily hark back to previous eras.
The roots of it were a kind of rejection of the formality and very kind of stifling patterns of 19th century living, where people didn't typically go outdoors very much. They put heavy curtains on their rooms, big emphasis on having a lot of objects in your house. It took a lot of servants to clean and maintain. The original impulse really was to do away with all that, simplifying and in a way democratizing sort of direction.
Although the earliest example of modern architecture is said to be Louis Sullivan's Wainwright building, constructed in 1891, the American public at large hadn't had much exposure to this radical form of design until 1932, when the Museum of Modern Art curated an exhibition called the International Style. This collection of photographs and models from Europe and the United States introduced and endorsed the emerging form of architecture to an audience outside the architectural community.
And that not only showed in New York, but it toured around the United States. So that had a big influence on popularizing this movement.
One of the buildings featured in the exhibit was a school built for the progressive Bauhaus art movement in Germany. Founded by Walter Gropius in 1919, the Bauhaus philosophy valued equality and encouraged students to collaborate and experiment with a variety of art forms to promote the common good in the grim aftermath of World War I. Inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright's belief in the social function of design and architecture, students and faculty increasingly focused their creative energy on solutions to the severe housing shortage. As the school moved away from traditional systems and beliefs, even the building itself became an expression of a departure from the past.
Walter Gropius built the large building complex there for the school, which then served as a model and still serves as a model for architects who are wanting to design in the modern style.
Buildings with flat roofs, straight lines, and no ornamentation began to emerge all over the world. But architects weren't simply trying to imitate the Bauhaus aesthetic. They also wanted to emulate its progressive attitude. Some of their earliest clients were medical professionals who were hoping that their new, modern office buildings would echo the rapid advances in medicine and instill a sense of trust and confidence in their patients. In fact, the first commercial mid-century modern building in St. Louis was designed for an orthodontist, Leo Shanley, in 1935 by up-and-coming architect Harris Armstrong.
And so that architecture is sort of pointing to a more ideal society, right? Giving people a hope that's not based on these fallen systems, but on models like the Bauhaus that are expressly egalitarian.
Shortly after the international style had introduced Bauhaus to the United States, the Nazis rose to power and viewed the school and its teachings as a communist threat. Refusing to replace faculty with Nazi sympathizers, the school closed its doors for good. Many Bauhaus teachers and alumni fled to America, where they would find an influential place in some of the country's top universities.
It's really kind of a strange story in a way, yeah. If it hadn't been for Hitler, who knows what would have happened to architecture. But all these emigres in art and architecture had a big impact on the United States.
By the time the war was finally over, modern architecture was being viewed as a form of enlightenment and progress.
I think the public was very open to modern design because people had been talking about what is our post-war world going to look like.
A lot of men have gone through this routine, sat through the last Army lecture, signed the last Navy pay voucher, and come home to love and affection.
After World War II, American soldiers were returning home to a growing economy and the desire to settle down.
Nothing like a nice June wedding. But today there's something you've got to take care of before choosing a ring.
But while the country was about to experience an economic boom, there was a severe housing shortage in many cities, including St. Louis, often resulting in cramped apartments and no privacy for recently reunited couples. Developers set their sights on the open land beyond the city lines in an effort to meet this demand for affordable housing.
This story could be about you, your family, your hopes for the future, your home.
The Veterans Administration made guaranteed mortgages possible, so people that really didn't have large bank accounts could borrow the money and start a house. And the developers of the early subdivisions were very much attuned to that. That's one reason why most of the houses in the early subdivisions are quite small.
We were making homes for people that couldn't afford a big house. You know, that was our starter.
There were only a few more adventurous builders that were willing to consider modern design.
Developer Burton Denke not only took a chance on the modern style, but also on two young architects to design the homes for his subdivisions. World War II veteran and soon-to-be nationally famous Ralph Fournier was still a student at Washington University, and his wife, Mary Jane, had recently graduated as the school's fourth female architect. Working with the Fourniers' designs, Denke's firm, Modular Homes, in Kirkwood, Missouri, produced pre-cut, prefabricated panels to almost instantaneously create pleasant, affordable neighborhoods.
Really revolutionary at the time. It allowed the builders to really be cost-effective with their solutions. You know, they sold for about $14,000.
And it was easy to work with because we had panels that were 2'4", 4'4", 6'4". So if you wanted to make a bigger building, you could just add either one of those panels.
And so they were able to erect the posts and the beams and the roof, and then come back and dry in the building, erect those panels in about 2 days. He and Burton Denke walked the neighborhood with a survey crew and sited each house specifically to capture views, to capture natural sunlight. Large glass windows were south-facing if possible, and also to kind of screen privacy for your neighbors. You know, the houses are somewhat close together, so they were very deliberate in where they put those public spaces in one house that were next to, say, a more private space, a bedroom on the adjacent house. Each room really has a great view. They're very connected to the outdoors.
Vertically, because of the high ceilings, you could see the clear stories and see some of the stars at night. Those were other items that went into a lot of those contemporary houses. Bigger windows, not the old-fashioned colonial double-hung windows with bars in them and all that kind of thing. So you could see the outside, which also makes a room feel larger. It's not any bigger, but it makes it look larger because you don't have a wall to look at.
They did attract people who were interested in modern design, which, of course, turned out to be a much larger proportion of the population than they anticipated.
The layout of the home, too, reflects a new sort of idea about how family life can be arranged, breaking away from the little chambers where life was separate and hierarchical to something where everybody's seeing each other over the hearth or in the dining room, and those spaces flow together. And, you know, you only really remove yourself to sleep. So modernism is promising entire new sets of relations.
You know, there's a lot of young people that were looking for a new way of living. Ralph told me at the time there was probably 10 to 12 other young architects and designers that were first owners of these homes. Ralph and Mary Jane being one of them.
I graduated in '52, and in '53, my wife and I opened a little office. Started in the house until my son got on the drawings one day, added his incentive. After that, we rented an office, and that's the beginning.
60 years later, another husband and wife team would start their own architecture business in a home designed by the Fourniers.
We've owned Studio Lark for 7 years. We founded it in 2012. Most of our clients come here at some point during the process of designing their projects. And that's one thing we love about our house is we can use the sloped roof, for example, and the way that shapes the ceiling on the interior. We can also point to the texture of the stone and the patterning of the mahogany paneling, and we can have a conversation about how we can draw from that as inspiration and apply it to their own projects.
Inspired by the design decisions that went into her own home, Jessica reached out to Ralph to learn more about his and the late Mary Jane's practice.
I wrote him a handwritten letter, and then he called me one night. I'll never forget it. I told him I live in one of his houses, and we just started talking a lot. So I spent 3 years researching Fournier's work and curating an exhibition in 2014. I did a short film documentary. Absolutely, his work and his design sensibilities have influenced our practice. The kind of Fournier signature of design, that's how I think of it. Natural materials, ample natural light, open plan concept. He liked to really nestle the houses in the topography, allow the roofs to sort of follow that landscape. What he was able to pull off so early in his career is truly commendable.
Facilitated by new highways and federal mortgages, St. Louisans began to hurry towards the promise of a backyard and a little more elbow room.
They didn't see that they were damaging the city by moving to suburban development because at that time their jobs and all of their retail were still in the city.
But of course, this would change.
Okay, spoiler alert, I've already seen this program and it's terrific. Don't go anywhere. You're going to want to see the whole thing. You're going to see a lot of structures that you're familiar with, some that you're not familiar with. But it is just a fascinating, delightful program. We have a special guest with us here in the studio, so don't go anywhere. Tell you what you do, get by the phone and get ready to call 800-568-9099. You can talk to one of our volunteers, or you can text GIVE after you dial that number, because we have some very special thank you gifts just for this show. First of all, why don't you call and become a member at the $6 level, and we will send you the DVD of the program we're watching right now, Mid-Century Modern, and that's yours with just a $6 ongoing monthly contribution to the Nine Network. If you'd like to join us at the $8 level, well, we have something else very special, and that is this book, Modern Architecture in St. Louis. Again, chock full of text and photos of structures that you are familiar with, and the background on these architectural wonders are just fascinating. That's yours, our special thank you gift to you, when you become a member at the $8 ongoing monthly contribution level. Join us at the $12 or the $10 ongoing monthly contribution level, and you'll get both. You'll get the DVD of the program that we're enjoying right now, plus you'll get that fabulous book. You'll get both of those when you join us at just a $10 ongoing monthly contribution level. And then we have one more, and this is the big combo. At the $20 ongoing monthly contribution level, you will get the book, Modern Architecture in St. Louis. You'll get the video, the DVD of the program we're watching right now. You will also get a selection of note cards, once again, with some of these mid-century modern structures in graphics on the cover, and you can make them into thank you notes or get well notes, birthday notes, whatever you like. You'll get that. Plus, you'll get to come to the home tours, Modern STL home tour. That's going to happen in the fall. We don't have a specific date on that yet, but it will be in a neighborhood that is filled with mid-century modern houses, and you will get to come and walk through that tour. We'll hear more about that from Jessica in just a moment, but you'll get the tour, you'll get the note cards, the DVD, and the book at the $20 per month level. Let's go on over now to Kate Durbin and our very special guest.
And we do have a special guest here in studio. This is Jessica Senni, and she is an architect here in St. Louis, as well as the vice president and a member of the board of Modern STL. And I think probably a lot of people until tonight or until today were not familiar with that name. Can you tell us about Modern STL?
Sure. We are a member-based, not-for-profit organization that works to celebrate and preserve mid-century modern design and modern and contemporary design here in St. Louis. We are 10 years old. We are celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, so we are very excited about that. We have a number of very fun events annually. We host the neighborhood tour every year. So we're very excited about that. I can tell a little bit about it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people, as they're thinking about their membership here at the Nine Network, would be interested in knowing if they went on a tour like this, what would that involve?
Right. So typically, they are definitely in a neighborhood that is filled with mid-century modern houses. Last year we were in Sunswept, so if your audience is familiar with that neighborhood, it is
in Creve Coeur?
That's right.
All right, yes,
and so it's right off of Lambert. The year before that we were in Ridgewood, which is featured predominantly in the film. And then the year before that we were in Sugar Creek Ranch. It's a really fun event. A lot of people come out. We typically have hundreds of people.
Wow. Is that like it's a walking tour of the neighborhood?
That's right.
Right. And do people stay outside, or any of the homes open, or does it depend?
Absolutely. So normally there are around half a dozen to a dozen houses, and those homeowners open their doors. They're beautifully decorated. And the tour goers get to walk around the neighborhood, into the homes, talk with the homeowners. It's a lot of fun.
It seems like more and more people who are buying mid-century modern homes. I mean, it's had such a rise, you know, for a long time. It probably was like, oh, that old thing, and you know, these are really kind of weird. They're designed strange, but now people are really excited about the architecture. They're excited about ceramics from that time. They're excited about furniture. Boy, there's a couch I gave away that I could kick myself. But so people who buy the homes tend to decorate in that manner as well, yeah?
It depends. I mean, we really like to say that we believe you know, people should celebrate what is already really great about the architecture of the house, but then upgrade it for modern lifestyles. So it depends. I wouldn't say, we like to say that people maybe don't necessarily want to treat them like a museum, but like a house.
Oh, it makes sense. Makes sense. Well, if you are interested in seeing some of those houses and how people use them and live in them, you may consider becoming a member of the Nine Network right now. We make it really easy. You can go to ninenet.org. That's ninenet.org. Or you can give us a call, or now you can even text at 800-568-9099 and just text GIVE. We make it easy for you. And we're going to be back. Thank you so much for what you've talked about so far. We'll be talking more about Modern STL in just a bit, but first we're going to go back to Will, and he's going to tell you more about our thank you gifts.
Thank you.
I certainly am, but I do want to remind you that this is the kind of program, this is a signature program for the Nine Network. This is a program that you won't see anywhere else. It's a program that helps you look up at television as opposed to looking down, or something that is just brain candy or background noise. This is a program that you will enjoy and talk about tomorrow and for weeks to come. And it's a very special type program, and only the kind of thing that you will see here on the Nine Network, and it depends so much on your support. So please call us right now. We have some very special thank you gifts that'll make it all the more fun to become a member of the Nine Network. Join us at the $6 ongoing monthly contribution, and we will send you the DVD of the program we're watching right now, and that is something that would be very nice to have to pull out every now and then and kind of remember there, because there's so many structures that you're going to see throughout the program and the history and the background. It's nice to have things like this for reference as well as entertainment. That's yours at the $6 level. Join us at the $8 level, and we have this fascinating book, Modern Architecture in St. Louis, and it's full of photos and text about many of the structures that we'll be seeing in this program and many more that you won't. That's yours with an $8 monthly contribution to the Nine Network. Join us at the $10 level, and we'll send you the book and the DVD. You'll get both, and that really is a bargain. That's yours with just a $10 monthly contribution to the Nine Network. Don't forget, anything over $60, you'll also get Nine Passport, and that's an app that allows you to look in on a library of Nine Network programs, hundreds of them that you can pull up any time of the day or night on your smartphone, your television, or your computer. And then we have the $20 level, and that is the big combo. You get the book, the DVD, you get a pack of note cards with some of these special structures on there in text, and the tour of the mid-century modern neighborhood. More on that later.
The best work for design, the best contracts for tract housing, office buildings, strip malls, schools, churches emerged in St. Louis County. Great new buildings, and they're all going modern. And so much more of the mid-century modern footprint would be developed in the suburbs. It's a foreshadowing of everything that would happen for the rest of the century, where the city goes one way and the county goes the other.
For the past century, downtown St. Louis had been a collection of bustling streets and smoke-stained commercial buildings along the riverfront. Deciding a clean sweep was in order, block after block, building after building came down to make way for a new identity.
It was a very important place industrially, internationally as well. And I think people like Joseph Pulitzer really wanted the city to sort of emulate New York at that point, that New York was becoming the world capital at the end of World War II. It seemed like St. Louis had the potential to become a city like that.
And St. Louis thinks in the 1930s it's going to have 1 million people by 1980.
People were living in large families in very small apartments. So the crowding was really a very real issue.
There was a lot of focus on what were started to be called blighted areas. A lot of the houses didn't have indoor plumbing. They had been built as luxury housing before these new technologies. So a lot of wealthier people just started to move farther west. Those were also the areas, the only areas where African Americans arriving to work in factories, mostly in the 19-teens, were allowed to live.
In an effort to alleviate overcrowding and improve housing conditions, principles of modern design, such as space management and efficiency, were applied to the urban renewal plans, sometimes at the expense of whole neighborhoods and communities.
A lot of federal money for slum clearance from the 30s really down into the 70s. A tremendous, eventually, amount of displacement.
And so urban planning marries itself to scientific modernism, principles of rational management of space and production.
And that's the context of doing things like Pruitt-Igoe and building these high-rise projects, that they were really modeled after New York City Housing Authority projects. But that was part of this idea that the city needed to be remade.
A lot of towers like Mansion House getting built, Edward Durrellstone's Showpiece Stadium.
The overcrowding was lessening, and the city was able to improve the overall standard of housing.
There was a sense that St. Louis was transforming itself into a kind of cosmopolitan post-war capital. The new airport, all the new religious buildings, it was all part of that.
People were willing to invest in these buildings because they saw a great future for St. Louis.
Modern design reflected post-war America's desire for a fresh, optimistic view of the future. Great minds, artistic vision, and new materials made anything seem possible. And for St. Louis, the timing was perfect as it prepared to choose the design for a national monument that would commemorate westward expansion. Initially, the classical forms that dominated the Washington, D.C. landscape were looked to for inspiration, especially the Jefferson Memorial. But America's part in World War II delayed the project and literally changed the shape of the city's unforgettable symbol.
The design of the memorial then is up in the air. It could be a giant obelisk or a temple. All that is making young architects fearful because they think this is an opportunity to do something modern. And you won't end up with a dud, outdated classical temple that won't get any press, that won't point a way forward.
In 1947, a competition was held to determine the monument's design. Not only were the majority of the submissions modernist, but so was the jury, which included influential architects Richard Neutra and William Worcester.
The decision was then to award the first prize to Eero Saarinen, who was at that time just a young architect. So that launched Eero Saarinen's career. He became one of the leading architects of the 1950s.
And the arch, before it's ever even built, before it's even committed to construction drawings, becomes the symbol of the city on letterheads, signs, advertisements. St. Louis then gets a magnificent moment. Part of the national narrative is anchored on a larger-than-life, colossal, abstract arch in St. Louis. Federal money and federal ideological endorsement behind modernism.
Showing here that the classical tradition was no longer the proper style for big monumental government projects.
But the creator of the arch wouldn't live to see it reach its soaring height. Saarinen died of a brain tumor in 1961, years before construction was complete. The monument was finally dedicated in 1968 by Vice President Hubert Humphrey.
And he gives a speech in which he says, everything built in St. Louis will be measured by the arch, endorsing modernism and endorsing change. These 20 years between that speech, going back to the competition, are great days for mid-century modernism in St. Louis.
Whether it was expansion in the county or reinventing the city, once again, World War II played a major role in the development of those who were commissioned to bring this vision to life. In a perfect storm of tragedy, timing, and opportunity, St. Louis gained some of the greatest modern architects in the country.
My grandmother used to tell me that my father knew when he was 5 years old that he wanted to be an architect. It was just, he knew it.
As a freshman at the University of California, Berkeley, Gyo Obata was enthusiastically pursuing his lifelong dream of becoming an architect. But the world was at war, and soon, international events would determine the course of his future.
My father was totally focused on architecture school, not paying attention to political and world events. The Japanese were beginning to be segregated out of society in California.
Moving inland and away from the Pacific military zone was one of the only ways for Japanese Americans to avoid internment camps. A few businesses and schools were open to accepting these refugees as workers or students, including Washington University in St. Louis.
And my grandfather told him that he needed to pay attention and try to get outside of California to continue his architectural education. So he looked into WashU because it was the closest architecture school to California at the time. So he applied. I don't think he thought much about it, but then the executive order came out to relocate all the Japanese. A colonel in the Army who was a friend of my grandfather's came one night and said, here's a pass for your son, get him out tonight because they're gonna take everyone else tomorrow. And so he got out on a train that night and came to St. Louis. My father's brother and his sister and his parents were all relocated to internment camps the next day.
Fellow Japanese American Richard Henme spent months in an internment camp before he was able to enroll in Washington University. Initially interested in aviation, he decided to pursue architecture instead and was classmates with Obata.
My dad has always said that he was so accepted in St. Louis. He's always spoken so highly of St. Louis because it was so welcoming to him at that time. It's amazing that WashU accepted Japanese Americans.
These distinctive voices would join the murmur of modernism that was growing louder at Washington University. Despite the growing interest in modernism among both students and faculty, the university's architectural curriculum had remained fairly conservative.
Local architects like Charles Eames and William Bernoulli actually dropped out of the WashU program in the 30s because they were interested in Frank Lloyd Wright, and there was no support for that. Walter Gropius, the founder of the Bauhaus, had come to the Harvard Graduate School of Design in 1937, totally modernized the curriculum, and that set an international model.
Already famous for designing the Muni, faculty member Joseph Murphy became Dean of Architecture at Washington University in 1948 and shifted the school's focus towards modernism.
Murphy really then builds out a faculty that includes people who are adherents to modern design. It's the people coming to teach at Washington University who leave such a big mark, like Fumihiko Maki.
Eugene Mackey Jr., who later founded the firm Murphy and Mackey with Joseph Murphy.
They were coming as young rising stars and working with a young faculty. So it's this sort of, I think, excitement and cross-pollination.
A lot of returning veterans were able to go on for the first time to get college degrees or graduate degrees. They were very critical of classicism, things they associated with fascism and totalitarian regime. So they were very enthusiastic modernists.
These ideas not only were open to consideration, but were being explored with the kind of ferocity and curiosity that people very new to an idea bring. And Murphy really encouraged and enabled that. And then that leaves its mark in the built environment of St. Louis. Practitioners like Gyo Obata, George Casaubon shaped the map of the 60s and 70s.
But it wasn't just the modern style that these architects embraced. They also saw the aesthetic and economic benefits of some of the new building materials and techniques developed during the war, and began to apply these to the vision for a renewed city.
The city of St. Louis decided to recreate the central part of the city that began around 18th Street all the way up to Grand Avenue. And most of that was pretty bad slum.
Council Plaza was part of the original Mill Creek Valley Urban Renewal Project, and it reflected the optimistic look to the future that was so prevalent at the time. It was 2 apartment buildings with a large office and retail complex.
We knew that the budget was tight, and so we couldn't use a lot of fancy material on the outside, so we did something unique. We poured it out of concrete with the aggregate exposed, and we sandblasted the aggregate so that it became a finished surface, and worked out pretty good. Saved a lot of money.
To give the whole thing a little bit of flair, the architect Richard Henme designed the circular flying saucer kind of gas station to be right at the entrance.
Since everything else was rectilinear, we felt the need for a strong shape to emphasize the location.
Whether you stopped there for gas in the 60s, late-night tacos in the 90s, or a coffee yesterday, Henry's Flying Saucer Building immediately brings to mind the Jetsons, which is to say, the future. The overhang, a hyperbolic paraboloid made of thin shell concrete, is held in place by beams that are based at angled piers in the building's center.
Thin shell concrete was an important factor for the whole modern movement, and it allowed these circular buildings. The Bauhaus building in Dessau was all right angles and flat roofs. Some of the doctrinal modernists really thought that introducing curves was a betrayal of the aesthetic of modern architecture. But fortunately, we had great architects like Eero Saarinen and Dick Henme who were willing to go beyond that.
A few years before Henme designed the Flying Saucer as an exclamation point for Council Plaza, his Washington University classmate, Gyo Obata, was also experimenting with thin shell concrete with magnificent results.
I still love the smell of concrete, of freshly poured concrete. It takes me back to those days. Well, when I was like 5 or 6, I was fortunate to be able to spend a lot of time with my dad, so he would take me to construction sites. So the Priory took advantage of new construction techniques that happened after the war. I think a lot of contractors were like, we're not doing this. We have no idea what this is. But I think someone at McCarthy saw those drawings and said, we need to know how to do this. We need to figure this out because this is the future. So they figured out they could build a wooden frame and then spread thin shell concrete over it, and then it would dry, and they would take that form and move it. Forms of Priory really imply, sort of reaching up into the sky, reaching, it's a very spiritual kind of movement. When you look at it from the outside, it's that beautiful white form. But the windows look dark, so you really see this contrast of the white concrete shell and then the cow wall window system. But when you go inside, it's like this light-filled space. I love that it has those two different attitudes in a way. It's really one of my favorite buildings.
I think this is a wonderful indication of how widespread the acceptance of modernism was, that even church groups designed modern buildings. The A-frame seemed to lend itself to churches because it had the same soaring effect that Gothic architecture has. In the case of synagogues, ever since the middle of the 19th century, the Jewish community in the United States had been looking for styles of architecture that would separate them from Christian places of worship and give them a distinct character. When B'nai Emunah decided to move to University City, they hired one of the great modern architects of the very foundational pioneer era, Erich Mendelsohn, who had been a refugee from the Nazis in Germany, already internationally famous. The building he designed for them in 1946 was considered the first modern synagogue in the world. As other large congregations moved west, they also did modern designs. Temple Emmanuel was designed by Bernoulli and Mutro. It's worth seeing.
The philosophies and ideals of modernism were interpreted and expressed in a wide variety of buildings and homes throughout the middle of the 20th century. But it took the mind of a futurist to inspire one of St. Louis's most famous modern structures.
This is a Geodesic Dome.
Made of aluminum and originally enclosed in plexiglass panels, the Climatron at the Missouri Botanical Garden was the world's first completely air-conditioned greenhouse.
It's not designed by Buckminster Fuller, but it's a Buckminster Fuller concept. And Fuller was an important influence in the mid-20th century, that he was a kind of self-taught engineer, college dropout, who became very interested in energy flows and efficiency. He was also connected to some of these avant-garde art and architecture circles.
These two realms of thought and practice inspired Fuller to design the Geodesic Dome,
which he thought was the most efficient way to enclose space using the least amount of material, a very modernist kind of idea. His original idea was that it would be housing and it would be demountable and could be expanded quickly.
But while the vision of leafy suburban streets lined with geodesic homes never came to be, the design turned out to be perfect for a greenhouse.
In the late 50s, people who had worked with him, a firm called Synergetics in North Carolina, designed it, and then they worked with Murphy and Mackey, the St. Louis architects. Initially, it was going to have other climates all under the same dome. It would have 4 different climate zones. Those didn't work out that well, so it became what it is now, a tropical greenhouse. But it's a very interesting example of some of these mid-century ideas.
But the post-war optimism that contributed to the mainstream acceptance and application of modernist architecture began to lose its shine, and eventually, so did the buildings.
We will be going back to the program in just a few minutes, but we want to take this opportunity right now to thank all of you who are members of the Nine Network, because you have made this program possible. Local programs are produced because you provide the dollars to have someone go out and research it and write it and film it and find the experts and then edit it and put it together and get it on the air. You make that happen. So please, if you are not yet a member, won't you join us now? And if you are enjoying this look at mid-century modern in St. Louis, know that this is just a broad overview of the topic. There is so much more to tell. There is also so much to tell about the other architecture that we have here in St. Louis. We have such a deep variety of styles. There are so many stories to tell, and we are just spoiled with the beauty of the buildings here in our area. We can produce more programs just like this with your help. So please, whether you decide to go online at ninenet.org, that's ninenet.org, or you can call us, or you can even text us at 800-568-9099 and text GIVE. You're going to become a member in just a few minutes, but the impact of your gift is going to be there throughout the year. Let me tell you a little bit about the thank you gifts. When you do become a member, if you join us at just $6 a month, we're going to say thank you with great local programming, along with Mid-Century Modern in St. Louis, the program that we are enjoying right now. If you decide to join us at just $8 a month, this is a terrific book, beautiful photographs. It was put together by Professor Erich Mendelsohn of Washington University, the School of Architecture over there, and you would certainly enjoy that. Or at $10 a month, you'll receive both the book and the video, a great deal right there. Or, I think this is terrific, at $20 a month, your sustaining membership is going to get you all the great programming along with the book, the video, the note cards, which I think they're still over there, and Will can tell you about those. But you'll also have the opportunity to be a part of a very special Modern STL home tour. These are tours that will take you through a neighborhood in the St. Louis area to look at mid-century modern homes. And Modern STL, the organization that put together, has been doing these for the last few years, and they tend to sell out. So we are very grateful that they have allowed a number of tickets here for members of the Nine Network. So whether you decide to join us at $6 or $8 or $10 or $20 a month, you're going to get a very special thank you, but you're also going to know that programs like this, programs that celebrate our area and our region and take us a little deeper into its history, are only possible because we have our members. Won't you please call, text, or go to ninenet.org.
And I am here with a lady you've already seen her in the program. This is Jessica Senni, Jessica Senni, who with her husband Aaron, they're both architects. They live in a mid-century modern house. You've seen that in the program as well. In addition, she's also vice president of Modern STL, which is a group of enthusiasts of this kind of architecture, but also they are very much involved in preservation.
Yes.
I'd like to know more about that. How, you know, what have you preserved, and why do you preserve it?
Right. So preservation is absolutely the top priority of our organization. We really work to get the message out about the importance of mid-century modern architecture in St. Louis. We, drum up a lot of enthusiasm with events like our house tours. And really, we're working to save as many of these buildings as, we can. In residential especially, many houses are threatened with being torn down or have been torn down. Certainly the Saucer building, which is featured in the film, is a major sort of triumphant story of ours. But absolutely, preservation is a top priority of ours.
Is there a more than average number of these buildings in St. Louis? Is mid-century modern? Was it big here, maybe bigger than Indianapolis or Kansas City? Or
I mean, it's hard for me to compare this metro area to those metro areas, but we absolutely have an abundant building stock of mid-century modern buildings. The neighborhoods that are featured in the film, like Ridgewood, which is in Crestwood, you know, there are more than 200 houses in that neighborhood alone. In Sugar Creek Ranch, where our house is, there are more than 60 houses. So I would say absolutely, and those are just really the neighborhoods in St. Louis County. We definitely have a number of really great mid-century gems in the city as well. So I would say yes, we have a very rich building stock when it comes to mid-century modern design.
why is it important to preserve these buildings? I mean, is it just a curiosity thing? I mean, why is that so important?
Right, well, I think it depends on who you ask. But I think, you know, not only is it important for their role in history, but they're well designed. You know, people love these houses and love these buildings for the same reasons that we love living in one. The large panes of natural glass, the connection to the landscape, the high ceilings, the natural materials. They're well designed, and you know, I think in many cases better designed than maybe some of the buildings we see in present day. So I think that's why it's so important to preserve them.
Tell me a little bit, in our combo package, one of the items, they get 4 items in that, but one of them is the tour of mid-century modern houses. Tell us about that tour. I didn't get to it in much detail.
It's so fun. We have usually hundreds of people that come out, and our visitors are free to walk the neighborhood. They can come in and out of houses, talk with the homeowners, and they really get a glimpse into a variety of mid-century houses. They're our favorite event all year long. So.
Do the owners tend to put on the dog a little bit, kind of spruce things up?
Absolutely, and there are snacks. There's a lot of socializing. It's really a fun event.
Now that's going to take place, I know, in the fall. We don't have an exact date on it yet, but fall weather in St. Louis is very nice. Good time for that.
That's right. That's right. Usually it's in September or October.
Okay. Well, let's go back over to Kate and hear all about all the thank you gifts.
Excellent.
That's right. Of course, we're going to end with that combo, but let's start at our membership level of just $6 a month. At $6 a month as a sustaining member, you're supporting all the great programs here on the Nine Network, and we're going to say thank you with your very own copy of Mid-Century Modern in St. Louis. It is the program that we're enjoying right now, and you will enjoy it without membership breaks, so consider that. If you join us at just $8 a month, you are going to get this beautiful coffee table size book. It's Modern Architecture in St. Louis. It comes from Professor Erich Mumford of Washington University. I was looking through it earlier. The photographs are just breathtaking. Wonderful. Yours at just $8 a month, supporting the Nine Network. At $10 a month, you'll receive both. So that is wonderful. You'll get the book and the video. And if you join us at $20 a month, besides our sincere and grateful thanks and great programming, you'll get all the things that I talked about, as well as the note cards that were designed by Nick Maggio, a board member of Modern STL. Really, really lovely, very clean, bright graphics, and you will get tickets to the home tour that will be led by members of Modern STL. You know, that's a 10-year-old organization for enthusiasts of mid-century modern and contemporary architecture, people who want to preserve and protect and celebrate great architecture here in St. Louis. We want you to preserve, protect, and celebrate the great programming here on the Nine Network by becoming a member right now. You can do that for as little as $6 a month, $8 a month, $10 a month, whatever membership level makes sense to you. And in return, you are going to see great television on 4 separate broadcast channels. There's 9 Kids, 9 Create, 9 World, and what you're watching right now, PBS, the broadcast station. All of that, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, because you become involved with your station, the Nine Network. Give us a call, text, or go to ninenet.org. Thanks.
By the 1960s, international style influenced buildings were no longer radical. They were normative, moderate choices, or maybe even conservative.
All of these buildings were built with clean lines and simple forms, but as those things started to age, if they weren't maintained well, you end up with buildings that have sort of lost their original luster. Other elements are being added on that aren't specifically appropriate for the period, and things start to look a little ugly.
There's also the issue in the 1970s of the American energy crisis. Suddenly the glass walls really are not energy efficient. Architects in the 70s are trying to figure out how to make buildings more energy passive, and to do that they have to be even more functionalist than the modernists. They had cut the look.
In the mid-70s, there was a series of kind of expose books showing how original ideals of the modern movement, better designed for everybody, had really been dropped.
Promises of a bright future where built environments contributed to human happiness and harmony remained unfulfilled as cities emptied, racial tensions persisted, and the country found itself back at war.
A lot of this urban planning is, accused of being sort of disastrous modernism. It destroyed neighborhoods, it built unworkable projects. The story is more complicated. The destruction of Pruitt-Igoe has an influence because it casts urban renewal in a suspicious light. And the easiest thing to do for planners who don't want to blame their profession and politicians who don't want to blame policy or power is to blame the architects, not the housing authority's inability to keep the place in good order, not the planners who decided it was a good idea to have a giant 57-acre super block. And so Minoru Yamasaki is seen as the culprit in Pruitt-Igoe for a long time, and that leaves a stigma.
Ironically, in its attempt to reform failed policies, broken systems, and toxic environments, modernist ideals and architecture had simply become the new scapegoat for these old problems. As the next 3 decades rolled by, many of these one-time radical buildings were being neglected or torn down.
Here in St. Louis, the baby boomers were busy preserving their grandparents' architecture, Soulard and Lafayette Square. They didn't really care much about those environments that they grew up in.
But in the 2000s, some of the same elements that had kick-started the modernist movement at the beginning of the previous century contributed to its revival.
It takes a younger generation to appreciate what the older generation no longer cares about.
As they entered adulthood, Generation X would begin to do for mid-century modern what their parents and grandparents had done for Victorian architecture. And while half-finished McMansions lined quiet streets after the 2008 recession, the modest, modern homes that Fournier and others had designed for young families were still providing an affordable option 6 decades later.
There is a sensibility that is found in mid-century modern houses that people are drawn to even if they can't quite articulate why. I've heard neighbors in this neighborhood say, it was just right when I had 3 kids in the house, and then when the kids moved out, it was still just right. I really think that's what it is. It's quality of life.
Mid-century modern architecture and style is not just experiencing renewed popularity and revival, but also acknowledgement that it is a historic movement worth preserving. And many of the buildings are being saved through the act of repurposing.
I got a degree in urban planning, and I found after 6 years of tearing buildings down that the way to save cities is actually to keep the buildings standing and work on what we have.
I grew up with the Northland Shopping Center in the early 2000s. When they started talking about how they were going to tear down, I took a drive back there to check it out, brought my camera. Then I pull into the Northland parking lot and I came home. I spent all of these years studying architecture and learning about the history. I had completely forgotten the environments that I grew up in, but here it was. That geometry and the textures. I spent the next 3 or 4 years exhaustively, photographically documenting every cubic foot of Northland. The clock was ticking because they did start tearing it down in 2005. While I was working on it is when I realized that all of the buildings from that era were in danger.
When we did inventories of historic resources in the county, we stopped at the end of the Depression with the buildings that were built after 1940 we didn't even include in our surveys. So we had to make up a lot of lost time starting about 2005.
Because so many mid-century modern buildings still look so, well, modern, public perception tends to lean towards the idea that they are too new to be historic, leaving them overlooked for preservation and vulnerable to teardowns, when the land they sit on seems to be worth more than the building itself, despite the fact that many of the structures are at least 60 years old. In 2009, a failed attempt to save the San Luis apartments on Lindell would bring mid-century modern preservation activists together to form Modern STL.
Modern STL is a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization, and we're really interested in the celebration and preservation of mid-century modern in St. Louis.
We've done lots of home tours, lots of open houses to not only help preserve these structures, but to really get people to interact with the architecture. So many of these buildings were designed top to bottom by the architect, including some of the furnishings inside. So really to get a good sense of how the building functions and its original intent and how the design works, you absolutely have to get inside to experience that.
As we come on in, we see the texture of the California redwood that is echoed on the interior of the house as well as the exterior. Here in the kitchen, we have white birch veneer. The method for applying the veneer is known as blueprint matching. So we actually see the veneer as it continues across the door panels. And that was, again, very intentionally coordinated by Ralph Fournier.
Throughout the mid-century, it became common for architects like Fournier to have their plans published in lifestyle magazines. And this widespread circulation further acquainted the public with modern design. Better Homes and Gardens featured Idea homes, and in 1956, it was Fournier's design that was chosen for the honor.
I guess they picked me because they saw some of what I was doing for Burton Dinky. It was after we did Burton's house. It was after we did Sunswept. It was after we did Craig Woods. So they'd seen all of those and probably thought, well, this guy's got a little bit more pizzazz. The first one was built, I think, up in Creve Coeur. And from there, they took pictures, and it was in the magazine. And then they built it in 93 different cities in the United States.
The home that Fournier designed for builder Burton Dinky is an excellent example of what the architect was truly capable of when unrestricted by budget or a suburban layout, and is admittedly his favorite. Perched high on a river bluff, the house was saved from demolition 25 years ago by landscape artist Ann Lewis and her husband Frank Flotron.
We came in through this back door, and I was uncharacteristically quiet. Because at that hour of the day, this room was the color of butter. Because it's constructed of wood, it's like living inside of a musical instrument. You can tell by my big beaming smile, it's been a privilege to live in this house.
Brittany and Jeff Allen didn't have to save their mid-century modern home from demolition, but found their own way to create awareness and build community around the collection of beautiful work by architect Charles King in Belleville, Illinois.
I am obsessed with our house. Jeff had kind of pushed me, you should start an Instagram account. Like, people need to see what we're doing. Share King with the world.
After serving as a B-17 pilot in the war, Charles King and his wife Audrey settled in her hometown of Belleville.
He was one of the co-founders of the Sports Car Club in Southern Illinois. So he would navigate on the rallies, and Audrey would drive. She was pretty ace behind the wheel.
When he wasn't spending his time around fast cars, the prolific architect designed over 130 buildings for the small city between 1947 and 1961, including his own home.
He often remarked that, he really was in the business of solving problems. Probably the best example is the Farthing House here in Belleville on Main Street, which became known as the House in the Hole because the roof was level with the street. That was an early design, and it became one of the, I think, touchstones of people that caused them to hire Charles to do their house, because it's an example of taking a site that's not the easiest to design a house for, and did a great job. He also had some design tenets that he would be pretty firm about. Watching him sell that idea to affect the good design that you have in mind and also satisfy the client. It takes a certain skill and a certain charm. Most of his work is still alive and well cared for, as the Allens is.
I just started, just for fun, throwing some pictures up, and I did not know how interested people would be in it.
Even if the community hasn't heard of Charles King, they know his work. It's all over the city. It's in the homes. City Hall is a Charles King design.
It's fun to build that community of people who also appreciate it, or people who live in homes and are going through the same, challenges or exciting things that we are. There are not many people in their 30s who want to stay at home every weekend and do home projects, but that's us.
Right.
It is very enjoyable to see the renaissance of mid-century modern design, and in particular his homes.
But while homeowners like the Allens and the Belleville Historical Society work hard to preserve and document his designs, a few of King's buildings still fell through the cracks.
The fire station in downtown Belleville, it was a beautiful, beautiful, handsome brick building. They demolished it to make it a parking lot.
Charles King is part of what Belleville was built on. To destroy his work, or to destroy the work of any architect, you're destroying a piece of the history that created, the city that you live in today.
I truly believe that because of our fight in 2009, even though we lost the San Luis, we did get the attention of the politicians and the people who pass or decline on development. You also had the ascendancy of social media, where you could make a page and get everybody on board, and they're standing behind you making a big stink.
Modern STL members applied what they had learned from their failed attempt to save the building on Lindell to launch one of the most well-known preservation campaigns in St. Louis history.
When the building was being rehabilitated, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and the developer used the federal and state tax credits to rehabilitate the large buildings, and then announced that he was going to tear down the little gas station, which was really the signature building of the whole complex. So people were upset because of the loss of the building, but also the hypocrisy of it.
There was a major uproar, and they had 12,000 Facebook hits objected to that.
Come on, it's the saucer. This is a cool building. You don't want to tear this down?
It was great that so many people rallied around that structure, not necessarily all of them because of the design. A lot of people had memories of it just as a place they would go to get food at Del Taco or when it was Noggles. Some people remembered it from when it was Phillips 66 gas station when it was built. But there was a lot of emotion, I think, for people tied to that building.
The speed with which they were able to develop a constituency for that project, that was a phenomenon that really was on a national scale.
So they asked my help in trying to preserve it, and so we suggested an alternate use for it. Eventually, we convinced the developer that maybe this would work.
And you know, now we have a very successful Starbucks. We get to keep our saucer. I think everyone's happy.
And it has led to a lot of other saves, including the AAA building on Lindell.
Well, it felt good, yes. I was surprised at how many people were, you know, for it. And I knew what could be done with it, so, you know, I was happy to help.
In 2013, it earned a Preserve Missouri Award. We were all invited down to Jeff City. Richard Henme, he got to come with us and accept that award. Richard Henme was the architect of Northland Shopping Center.
But for every successful preservation effort, there are many more buildings that are lost due to neglect, politics, or a private owner's prerogative. The collection of mid-century modern buildings in downtown Clayton is currently under threat, including the one that started it all.
Honk for the Shanley!
It's in a walkable urban neighborhood. It's in good condition, and it's currently slated to be demolished for a new urban mixed-use development in downtown Clayton.
It may be easy to miss the Shanley if you're not looking for it, but the building certainly gives context to the modern business district that grew up around it, as well as the architect, Harris Armstrong, who would one day become known as the Dean of Architecture in St. Louis. A finalist for the Jefferson Expansion Memorial, his unforgettable designs can be seen all over the city and county. But preserving the work of architects like Armstrong doesn't always involve protests or petitions.
My house is not a museum, but I do try to retain a lot of the original character of the home.
One of the challenges facing those who rescue mid-century modern structures from wrecking ball or abandonment is that they can be notoriously tricky to restore, thanks to their unique materials and building techniques. Realtor Ted White lives in a home designed by renowned architect William Bernuti, and recently chronicled his careful updates to the historic property on his blog, St. Louis Style.
So when I redid the master bathroom, I found some tile that I had actually seen in a Frank Lloyd Wright house outside of Chicago, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's the same tile I'm looking for.
A lot of the styles of the mid-century period have been revived. For example, Herman Miller Furniture Company has reintroduced a lot of the textile designs and furnishings that they made 50 years ago.
The biggest thing I did that I really hesitated for a while was putting in skylights. Before I made that decision, there was another Bernuti designed house in Ladue that I was looking at. In the kitchen, there were skylights, original skylights. So I said, okay, it's okay.
It's that balance between the preservation of what's there and then keeping it modern, as in modern for today's standards, in a space that you can actually use and live in and feel comfortable.
Renovation not only preserves these homes for the future, but also leaves a much smaller impact on the natural environment that they were respectfully built around.
There is nothing greener than a building that is already standing.
I've always said that by enhancing these homes, you actually do save it, you know, because it makes it more current and sellable. Especially like younger people, you know, if we look at some of the Ralph Fournier houses, those get gobbled up because they provide that sort of dwell feeling. You know, an open floor plan, big windows.
There is a way to be cool and live in the suburbs, and it was already invented, and it already exists, and you just have to go back and buy one of these houses.
We've done lots of homeowners workshops, which really give people some of the tools they need to understand where they can source materials, where they can find contractors that might be a little more sensitive to the design of the types of home that they live in. Keeps it true to the mid-century period.
I really have tried to help promote these architects and the homes with a listing. We're talking about this Bernoulli designed house, this Harris Armstrong designed house, so that, you know, people appreciate their pedigree and it gives them value.
When Jeff and Brittany Allen bought their Charles King designed home, they also inherited the role of caretakers to its history.
People have collected everything and saved it, like any little tokens of history of the house. So we have all of the original blueprints. It was all here when we bought the house, and they said, here, this box of stuff is for you. So that's cool. It's been so well loved forever. Like, everyone who has lived in this house has appreciated what this house is.
It's been well over a century since the Wainwright Building first gave St. Louis a glimpse at modern architecture and the possibilities to come. For many, the American daydreams that were born during the Depression or far away in the trenches became their reality when peace and a good economy enabled affordable housing and grand public buildings that pointed towards the future. At the center of it all was the Arch, symbolizing St. Louis's long history of looking towards a new horizon. Its base stood where centuries-old neighborhoods once had, an intentional statement that times were changing. As unique and groundbreaking as modern buildings looked in the middle of the 20th century, they were still echoing shapes, patterns, and ideals that had come hundreds and sometimes thousands of years before. But instead of simply repeating a cycle, drawing from the past helped to weave in these new buildings together with the old.
The portal to St. Louis is the Lambert Airport terminal. And to me, that's such a fitting symbol of everything I see in good, responsible, and intellectually sophisticated modern design. The vaults are based on the Roman baths of Carcalla, a classical source. If you didn't know that, you just think it's this glorious, dazzling modern entry point. But that vaulting is also present in our art museum in the Great Hall overhead from 1904. And so it's this re-articulation, not rejection, but re-articulation of the past that I think makes modernism in St. Louis so powerful, because it's taking it and it's spinning it ever so slightly to show us something new was possible we missed the first time.
Well, that segment really did have a personal memory for me when they were talking about Charles King, the architect over on the east side in Belleville. They showed Haas Chevrolet, and my dear old mother worked there for about 15 years, and we lived right around the corner from there. This was in East St. Louis, and she'd walk to work, and that interesting that that's still considered to be a mid-century modern piece of architecture. But anyway, you saw lots of buildings there that I'm sure you recognized as well. And that's the sort of thing that makes a program like this so very, very interesting and fascinating. It's part of our history in addition to being architectural history. We hope you'll support it right now by becoming a member of the Nine Network. Call us at 800-568-9099. And naturally, we have some very special thank you gifts that go along with this program. For example, join us at just the $6 per month ongoing membership level, and we will send you the DVD of this program for you to watch whenever and wherever. Perhaps folks that have left the area have come in for the holidays, and you can sit around and watch this and sort of like watching your own home movies. That's yours with a $6 ongoing monthly contribution. Join us, if you will, at the $8 level, and we have that book for you, Modern Architecture in St. Louis, full of photographs of this program, of buildings that you saw in this program, lots of text, lots of history. It's really an excellent book. That's yours at the $8 level. Join us at the $10 level. That's $120 a year for everything you and your family enjoy here on the Nine Network. And we will send you the book and the DVD. And that really will give you hours and hours and hours of pleasure and interesting reading and viewing. You get the DVD and the book, Modern Architecture in St. Louis, when you join us with just a $10 per month ongoing monthly contribution. And then we have the $240 level. That's $20 a month. And we get it all for you. You get the Modern Architecture in St. Louis book. You get the DVD. You'll also get 2 tickets to the Modern STL home tour. That'll be coming up in the fall. There's no specific date yet, but it'll be in the fall. And you'll get to wander around a neighborhood that has several of these mid-century modern homes, and you'll get to tour them. And you'll also get several of these cards, and they each feature one of the buildings that we've been looking at. This one has the Climatron, this one has the Abbey from the Priory, this one has the Saucer Building, and this one has the St. Louis Planetarium. They're blank on the inside, so you can make them any kind of card you like. You get that in addition to all that other stuff at the $20 per month level. Let's go back over to Kate Durbin now and our very special guest.
And the special guest, I hope you had the opportunity to hear from before, but this is Jessica Seni. She is a principal with Studio Lark, located in Kirkwood, and you and your husband are part of that, right?
That's right, yes, we
Aaron.
are together.
Yes, and you also have another architect there.
That's right, there are 3 of us total.
Yeah, so that is great, and if you have a mid-century modern home, or I guess really any architecture that you not only like to design the whole thing, you like to go in and design the interiors and help people use their space, yeah?
That's right. We are a full services architecture and interior design firm. It's so fun what we do. We really love what we do.
Well, what got you interested in mid-century modern?
I think really back in 2011, we were living in a beautiful older 1920s home in South City.
And we have such a great stock of that.
That's right.
Here.
That's right. And we had renovated that house, and so we had sort of done an older home, and we wanted to look for more modern houses, and we started house hunting, and that led us to discover Ridgewood in Crestwood, which is in the documentary.
Right.
And then Sunset Hills, and then Kirkwood, and that's ultimately where we ended up.
Yeah, and so I said that we had so many of the 1920s homes, and even before that, and so we are so well known for our brick buildings here and our brick homes. But there's a lot more. There is a lot more here. And what are some of your favorite mid-century modern buildings?
Many of them were featured in the documentary, which was fantastic, by the way. I mean, I think that Nine Network did such an awesome job with the film, and Kara Vonnegut, the director or the producer, was just amazing.
And writer and voiceover.
Yes,
and it's
everybody was
part of her love.
Yes,
Yeah.
No, she did a wonderful job. I love Priory. I mean, I just love the power of that building and the interior space of that building.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, you do get in there and you do feel like it is elevated, and for a church, that just makes so much sense. You know, you just,
And I loved the stories in the film about the experimentation with the thin shell concrete forms, and how his daughter says that the smells of her childhood were concrete. I mean, I just loved that building and that piece of the film. Ethical Society, I think, is gorgeous.
Really, when light, the video with the light coming through the stained glass was just beautiful.
Yes, and we were talking off camera about how different the interior can be from the exterior, and how I think that's really illustrated with that building, because the wood ceiling on the interior of the main space, and then the stained glass windows and how they're activated with light coming through.
Right, you drive by it, and I think that you notice the roof that roof line, but other than that, it's just sort of, long, flat building. But then you come in and it is so warm.
Yes.
The wood and the light.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And the arch. I think, you can't live in St. Louis and not love the arch. And I think it's a fantastic example of mid-century architecture.
Right. I think one of my favorites from my childhood, and it's gone now, but the Parkmore that was at Clayton and Big Bend. It was just, even as a kid, I thought, the interior was kind of kitschy and all that. But I noticed the mix of materials and the way the roof line was, and it was just special.
And I think I think what's really great is how those memories, really impact us. And you remember that even now. We don't have that building anymore.
Right.
But that memory has been sort of imprinted.
Well, we hope that you have some of your favorites and that you're loving the show and like learning a little bit more about mid-century modern. And we hope that you help support it by giving us a call or texting GIVE to 800-568-9099. Will?
Thank you, Kate. I want to go through these gifts one more time because they're very special and you may have been looking at them and trying to make up your mind, so let's help you do that right now. If you'd like to call and join us at the $6 level, we have the DVD of the program that you've just watched, Mid-Century Modern. The entire program is there for you to watch whenever and wherever you'd like. That's yours with just a $6 monthly membership gift to the Nine Network. Join us at the $8 level, and we have something very special. This is Modern Architecture in St. Louis. It's a book. It's a soft cover. It's full of photos and text and history and detail about so many of the buildings we've seen in this program and many more that we haven't seen. That's yours. A great addition to your library. That's yours with an $8 ongoing monthly contribution to the Nine Network. Don't forget, every membership above $60 also gets you your Nine Passport, and that allows you access to dozens and dozens and dozens of Nine Network programs that you can watch anytime and anywhere on your smartphone or your computer. You can even watch it on your television. Imagine that. That's yours at any membership that goes $60 and above. Now, we also have the $10 ongoing monthly membership. That will get you the DVD and the book, Modern Architecture in St. Louis. You'll get the book and the DVD. That really is a nice, nice package. That's yours with just a $10 per month ongoing monthly contribution to the Nine Network. And then our big combo, and this is very special, you get the book, you get the DVD. You'll also get 2 tickets to that very special Modern STL home tour that's coming up in the fall. We don't have a specific date on it yet, but it'll be a neighborhood that is full of these mid-century modern homes, and you'll get to tour the inside and the out. It'll be a lovely fall day in St. Louis. You'll get 2 tickets for that. And then finally, you will get a box of these special cards. These are blank on the inside cards. I've got one right here. As you can see, it has the Climatron on it there. They're all blank on the inside, so it can be a get well soon or how you doing or anything you want. You get that in addition to all the rest at the $20 level. Call us and support the Nine Network right now.
Support for Mid-Century Modern in St. Louis was provided by Mackey Mitchell Architects.